Welcome, strangers, to Talkumentary, a show where we watch documentaries and then get together and talk about them.
All right, if I could have everybody stand up, please. You don't really have to do that in this room, but I would like for all of us to go inside to go outside. I will call a chant, Zimbabwe. It means the way the lion walks, the way the lion is, the way the lion be, so that we may be that way also. And after I say that word, you will answer shoo. Let me hear that sound. Say it one time. Say shoo. Shoo. Let it come from the navel. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Come on now, I can't hear you. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Zimbabwe. Shoo. Talkumentary. Shoo. Sounds a little like a train for a minute. Sounds like another Talkumentary episode. I want y'all to get on this train with me. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 12 of Talk. That felt kind of good.
It did feel really good. I'm not gonna lie.
I just can't jump on the bandwagon, but I'm with you.
Yeah, it reminded me. This is completely off topic, but it reminded me of like the hakas that they do in
the Maori tribes.
Yes, It's so cool. Anyway, welcome to Talkumentary. This is episode number 12. We're going to drop who we are on the streets and in the yard, and we're going to be authentic in this room. This week, with an ironic twist a little bit, I am joined by an all non-male crew to discuss a documentary that went into an all-male prison. All right, everyone, let's check in. Hello, Katie. Check in.
Katie and I go by the Rose in prison. That is my prison name.
Like Ruby Rose?
Yeah, for sure.
Molly, check in, girl.
Fun names. Katie, quick, give me a name.
Names. Molly the Moose.
Oh, shit.
Oh, no!
Molly Wally. Molly like the pill.
Welcome to Talkumentary, Molly.
Thank
again.
you. I'm checking in as Molly, myself, Molly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No,
and of
use
course,
your middle name.
No, absolutely not. That is nowhere going to be public ever.
good golly, Miss Molly.
That's great.
Coming at you live, Molly, the missus of the Molly. Good golly.
Well, welcome both of you back to Talkumentary. It's been too long since we've hung out.
It has.
This week, we watched an 87-minute documentary called The Work.
We're going into a maximum security prison, and you're being watched right now.
When I thought about the opportunity, it seemed just crazy enough to really wake me up a little bit.
This is a path that I need to take to better find out who I am as a person.
For 4 days, let's be what we could be.
Damn you! That's right.
This whole process of going down into the wound is not an end in itself.
Is that what you do? Sit there and judge me?
I be trying. Nothing I can do but say, man.
We're looking for something, and we're bringing something back out of that descent.
Open your eyes.
You trust me? Well, let's step into that fear. Now's the chance to see what you got in there.
Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe.
This was a documentary from 2017 that followed 3 civilians into the all-male New Folsom maximum security prison on a 4-day group therapy retreat with the men who are incarcerated for a real look at the challenges of rehabilitation. Ladies, initial reactions to, before we get too deep into it, how was this for you guys this week?
Hard.
Yeah, I was gonna go say tough.
I'm going to go with tough as a light word for it.
Yeah.
It was intense. It's hard to
watch people go into intensive therapy. It felt very invasive.
It did feel very invasive. Yep. It's also very hard as a woman watching masculinity be so vulnerable and so front-facing, especially because, they
confronted it, but also this is what we confront every day.
That's
in every aspect of our lives, from interactions at the gas station to our own personal relationships.
Yeah, well, we're taught to have our emotions on the outside and communicate those as we're experiencing them and what the needs are, and men are not.
Very
They're
much
not
not.
supposed to
Especially
feel
men,
them in the first place, let alone communicate them.
right? Especially men who have been incarcerated for
Absolutely.
so long, some of whom have been in there for a very long time. I thought this was a hugely moving documentary. It was crazy to see some of the, like you said, vulnerabilities, but also just the difference. So I live with all women, my 2 daughters and my fiance, and the difference between how a group of grown, incarcerated, kind of hardened men deal with their shit versus how women, it's a totally different world. It's so much more aggressive and intense on the outside anyway. But anyway, just some of the acclaim that the work won. They won an Audience Award for Documentary Feature at the American Film Festival. They won the Best Documentary Feature at Chicago Film Festival. A few of the stars of the documentary, so that would be Brian, Chris, and Charles, who were our 3 civilians, but also Dark Cloud, Kiki, and Vegas. They won the Unforgettables Award at the Cinema Eyes Honors Awards. Yeah, the documentary won an Audience Award for Best Documentary at the Sheffield International Documentary Festival, nominated for a whole slew of other awards, certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with 100% tomato meter, with 58 reviews and an audience score of 86, with over 500 reviews. Director is Jarius McCleary, produced by Alice Henty, Ian McCleary, Jarius McCleary, Miles McCleary, Angela Sastry. Sounds like it's a McCleary family event.
You think they have a connection to prison somehow?
I would bet so.
Yep.
Blanket Fort Media Production, which makes me wonder if that wasn't for this. Distributed by The Orchard and First Look Media. We streamed this on Canopy. We'll have a link with all that information
in the show notes.
Thank you. Let's get into it. Quick warning, if you haven't watched this and you want to see it before we listen to it, we're going to talk about what happens. So spoiler alert. Otherwise,
and trigger warning.
Yeah. Yep. That would be the other thing we want to talk about. There is some potential triggers here. A lot of emotion in this documentary, a lot of trauma speak. There is some
mentions of violence and suicide and assault.
So if this is not for you, or if you're listening with the kids and you don't want that to be a part of their morning or their day, then this might not be the episode for you.
Come back later.
Yep. So who's still with us? Are you still there? All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about why we chose the work. Miss Katy, tell us why we chose this documentary.
All right. So we have discussed in previous documentaries, if you listened, loyal listeners to the other ones, about private prisons and how terrible they are, and also the rate of recidivism in prison inmates, how they go back into the world and how they come right back because the programs that help them assimilate back into society are not functional. Ann Richards was the governor of Texas in 1988 to 1992, and she single-handedly halved the rate of recidivism in Texas by creating Alcoholics Anonymous programs and Narcotics Anonymous programs in prisons. And so I picked this documentary because it was a therapy program that specifically worked with inmates and then open to the public, which is just unheard of.
That's so cool.
And such an intensive therapy program that is free, that is for inmates and the public, and that has a 0% rate of recidivism.
Not believe that when I read that at the end.
And I just love saying that word. It makes me feel smart.
Recidivism? It's a good word.
It's also a very fun word to say. It kind of rolls off the tongue, you know?
Recidivism.
It's got a good flow.
Had either of you seen this before?
No, I hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah, I hadn't either.
I was very pumped. I Googled it.
I was much more, I was very kind of skeptical going into it, thinking that, how, I guess the authenticity or the legitimacy, I kind of get this feeling that a lot of times when you go into a prison with a camera, they ham it up. I think of shows like Scared Straight and those sort where, I'm going to act like a criminal because I want everyone to see how tough and how crazy I am, and that's whatever, but I didn't get a lot of that. It felt very authentic to me.
Very genuine and earnest.
Yeah, at least for the most part of what was going on in there. There was a lot of surprise for me on how this went. Does anything stand out as far as what, like surprises, or were your predictions going into this pretty spot on?
I didn't know what we were looking at. I'm so sorry. I did not know what we were looking at or what this was going to be about with the intensive therapy. And taking a look at masculinity in the way that we did, I do feel like the producers and like the directors did a good job of observing it without interfering in it. I genuinely felt like they were not intruding on the space at all.
So raw.
All of the people were so in the moment with each other and like into what they were doing that it didn't feel like they even knew that they were on film, even though they obviously did. It was a small room. It was one room the entire time. I don't know a lot of other places and topics that could film in one setting the entire time and it be as raw and emotional and moving and have so many stories in it as they did. So the way that they filmed it, I thought was insane.
And you very rarely, and it's surprising in that small of a room that you actually saw any of the camera. From time to time when they were going around the groups, when it was getting really intense, you did see one of the cameramen, but it didn't really take you out of.
Not at all.
If anything, it almost made it more raw, which I agree. I really liked that. Katie, how about you? Anything that
Sure. I think the setup was very interesting. They said that they assigned two people who'd been through the program, 2 convicts that had been through the program, to one outside person. And I thought that was so interesting because that means that not only are you relying on people from the prison to coach someone from the outside, but also you expect them to take care of this person on the outside. You're trusting them not just with their life, but with their emotional state. And that's the purpose of the program. But it was so shocking to think that the convicts were going to lead this. They were going to be in charge. And saying convict sounds not like the right term, but people who are in prison are going to be in charge of the people on the outside. And they were so earnest. They were so ready.
Agreed. To their credit, they were very good at getting people to that point and helping them through it. Not
reserved at all. It was the 3 guys that came in that were so reserved until they were pulled out of it.
Yeah, and there was we'll get into it a little more, but there was the spot where the 2 guys, when the one gentleman walked away and they're like, we got a live one. Here we go. He's got no idea what he's getting himself into, but we got him. We're going to get it. We're going to get to him. So let's get into some of our favorite or least favorite details about the work. But first, I'm going to give a quick synopsis. Inside New Folsom Prison, and some of this comes straight from the dialogue that was in the documentary itself, at least the text that came across the screen. Inside New Folsom Supermax Prison, convicts meet weekly for group therapy, as Katie alluded to, as part of a rehabilitation program. Most of these guys are serving long sentences for violent or gang-related crimes. Twice a year, with the prison's approval, members of the public are invited to join the convicts for 4 days of intensive group therapy. This documentary follows 3 civilians, Charles, Brian, and Chris, as they embark on this journey, each having their own reasons, each having skepticism, doubts, and expectations for the retreat, but all similarly clueless as to what they're walking into. Some of the convicts in the program have been to these sessions many, many times, and others are there for the first time, just like these civilians. The new guys, like Katie said, team up with 2 of the convicts who have experience to be their personal kind of guides during the experience. This group uses harsh realities and aggressive forms of support to encourage each other to feel their emotions, take off kind of the armor of machismo, of masculinity, so to speak, or at least the toxic version of masculinity, and allow themselves to feel things and work through things. And these men are not afraid to be physically close. They're not afraid to touch each other, to lay on each other, to look into each otother's eyes, to breathe in each other's breath, essentially.
To physically hold each other.
Yes.
And they're covered in tattoos.
Yeah.
All these horrible, like some of them may have gang tattoos. Some of them talked about being in gangs.
Yeah, ex-Aryan Nation.
Holding each other and crying. It was so incredible.
And this was all done in a way that showed the other people that you're being seen and understood, not in like a creepy, I'm going to hold you way.
Right.
It was all done in a way
No
that,
part of it was creepy.
not in my opinion, I agree. So the outsiders each tap into their own demons throughout the documentary and each have some sort of a breakthrough. Some of which cause some slight infighting between them and the inmates, which we can get into a little bit if we want. Specifically, Brian, who had a hard time holding back judgment on some of the inmates. Brian kind of creeped me out for the majority of this thing.
I had a hard time watching.
Yeah, Brian was a tough one for me.
I texted Molly while watching Brian, and I was like, I want to give up on this guy right away.
Yeah. And a little bit of redemption story, I think, for him, but overall, I'm not a big fan of Brian. But
it made
that's
him
just
less
a personal...
hateable, but didn't make him likable.
Good way to put it.
That is a great way to say it.
Yeah, like I'm glad that he got to feel the feelings that he did, but I still don't enjoy the character that he portrayed as.
Yeah,
like I'm
agreed.
He said some unforgivable things to people.
He said some pretty nasty.
Right.
Yep.
And regardless of what kind of trauma you have in your life, as Molly and I have discussed personally, everyone has trauma, but that doesn't mean you get to treat people poorly.
Right. Yep. And I think that's exactly what these inmates that lashed back out at him were saying. Like, he literally said, bitch, you don't get to come in here.
Yeah.
Who do you think?
They said, we're speaking our truth and you're sitting there judging us. Like,
that
what?
is not your
It was
place.
such a moment in the documentary. It was such a big moment because there was silence and they all looked at him and everyone knew looking at him what he had just done, but he is still
stone-faced
behind all of these brick walls of judgment and fear and pain, and he's just not there yet. And then to watch his entire deconstruction was so powerful. We were literally watching toxic masculinity fall down, but not just fall. He had to fight his way out of it.
Break out of it.
Yeah.
Scream his way out of it. Ultimately, it's implied that the civilians and inmates alike were able to let their guard down and receive some kind of relief and progress in their own lives. And it would be hard to imagine that some lifelong bonds weren't maybe formed in between these civilians and the inmates. So speaking of the inmates, there was a couple that we met, a couple of the more prominent ones throughout. One of whose names was Kiki or Keeks, they called him, who was the first to really break down when talking about his fears in life and not knowing how his family is. He was the first one we saw break down. I think he was new to the game as well.
It was also very early on in the documentary,
very early on,
where I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay, this is going to be really intense.
Yep,
like I had to kind of like take
there
a
was
moment.
no like smoothing
no
your way
easing
in.
us
No,
in.
there was absolutely no easing into it.
Yep.
Which was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
It was just kind of all or nothing because that's exactly
What
the emotions
intense
he was going
therapy
through.
should be.
Yeah.
Right. And to speak, to speak for masculinity, in a lot of ways, that's what you need.
Right.
You don't always need to be eased into things. Sometimes the best treatment is a punch to the gut. And that's what this was, in my opinion. Another inmate, Dark Cloud, who wanted to be...
Love Dark Cloud.
Yeah, he wanted to be vulnerable and has a pretty intense breakthrough at one point in this doc when he discusses how, when his parents split up, he went with his dad to try to help him out, but then he realizes he betrayed his mother by doing that, and that was kind of his breakthrough. If we want, we can get further into that in a little bit. Rick was kind of the biker sort of guy who constantly ran from people trying to do things for him. He got involved with a motorcycle club and the Aryan Brotherhood and stated how tired he was of all the blood and not being enough for people to hold on to.
Oh, I wrote that down because it just broke my heart.
Yeah.
He had been through so much. He'd been abandoned by everyone. And then when we talk about the story with his dad and the robot or whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a rough thing to try to,
comprehend.
Yeah. One of my personal favorites, Vegas. He's the one with the intense eyes.
He's the one
guy
who was basically a therapist for everybody else, right?
Yeah, he was the first one to step up to Keeks when he was going. He was the one that got about an inch from their face, and the big intense eyes.
I remember leaning back.
I know. I did too, where I felt, oh my gosh, I feel like he's invading my personal bubble.
Yep.
My favorite thing about that is that when he got those that close, grabbed the back of their necks, pressed foreheads together, no one pushed away. Everyone
until
accepted,
they broke down and that one.
and everyone accepted the touch that he was giving them because he created an environment for them where it was just a bubble between the two of them, and they were so emotionally like delved into each other that Vegas going up to them and like grabbing them and saying, "I'm here with you," was enough for them to take the step off the wall to have the breakthrough. And I just thought his piece in all of this, especially because we didn't really get to see his story of it at all. I was like, I felt so humbled by it. I was like, oh my God, like the inner work that he has done outside of something like that, or maybe in years past with other mentors who have done the same for him. Like it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it definitely struck me as one of the go-to guys when it's like, he's probably been there for a long time and probably, I mean, just from what we can 100%. Assume, I guess, without making too many assumptions, that he might be there for a lot longer.
Right.
But he's the one that's going, I'll be the first to step into your face and call you on your bullshit. Yeah. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here with you.
Yep.
And we'll go, like, don't let it, don't stifle it down.
Right.
Bring it out.
Yep.
Because
you are not alone.
Yeah. The last one I have on my list, Dante, he was a gangbanger who had a son who was being kept from him. He was considering taking his own life at this point, and the guys were. It really put the guys on edge because he was considering giving up. He is the one who had the "Ladies, please write me" sign, which was kind of interesting.
Was not acknowledged by anyone.
Right.
Honestly, kind of a flex.
Yeah, go ahead, ladies, call him or write to him. If you guys had to choose one of these or one of the other ones to be your guide, I know you're not a male, obviously, but let's just say for the sake of this, who do you feel like would be your go-to from these characters? It doesn't have to be someone I mentioned, but is there somebody that maybe that's not a fair question to feel because you maybe don't connect the same way, but
I believe one of the ones that I'm thinking of is one of the McLearys. Like one of the people who was there.
Oh, yes, the older gentleman.
Yes, he was one of the ones.
He had gray hair.
Did a lot
he was
of
on
talking.
the outside with glasses.
Well, he was on the one of the last scenes. He was wearing a red shirt and like a red do-rag matching.
Oh,
Remember what I'm talking about? That guy.
Yeah,
We can figure out who he is.
He was the one that called Brian a bitch, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
I felt like he was leading through. Sorry, that was the worst way to describe that, but I mean, you guys got it.
Yeah. Right there.
Well, we're trying to remember something visually.
Yep.
And I feel bad that I don't know his name. I think there's 4 McLearys, right?
I don't know.
I think there's 4. I Googled it after. And I feel like the way that he spoke to them and continued the conversations with them was exactly how I would like to be spoken to, because instead of, I don't know, I felt like some of the times when the inmates were responding or when Vegas was up close and personal, it almost made me a little uncomfortable because it was a little bit too much inner work for me to like face when I wasn't in that space.
Yeah.
But I felt like that guy was like more like, how do you feel? Let's work through those. We're here with you. It's like, it was more of like a natural kind of conversation when he was leading it. He was also kind of integrating other people's stories into it. And I loved the way that he spoke to Brian and was like, absolutely like unacceptable.
I'm going to call you on your bullshit.
I'm going to call you on your bullshit right now.
Yep.
I need someone who's like straight up with me like that.
Yep.
But a lot of this, especially as someone who's not a man, was really hard for me to watch because it was so intense that I was like, I have had intense feelings, but most of the times for women, the intensity of our feelings aren't rage, they're sadness.
Yep.
So
any rage is not allowed to be shown.
Right.
And no anger is allowed
when
to be shown.
When we have rage, it comes out in tears and that kind of thing.
Men
and
can
so
be angry outwardly,
but
women are Karens.
And so, so for a lot of the rest of it, I was a little uncomfortable because I was like, oh my God, because I can't imagine fighting my way through a crowd of 10 men just to get something out. And it makes sense that that would work and be helpful for men to have that physical embodiment of their rage and their sadness and their grief. But for women, I was like, oh my God.
And what's funny, or not funny, but what's interesting is when hearing you, who you chose as your quote unquote guide in this, hypothetical situation, was probably the more feminine energy.
Yep.
Man,
he was a little
that was
softer,
there.
gentler, like it was
Which
more
makes
coaxing.
sense. I mean,
yeah.
Which that would be kind of the same as the guy who did the Zimbabwe's at the beginning.
Yes.
Maybe same family. I don't know.
I think probably.
Yeah,
I
they
think
looked
so.
very similar.
Yeah, we really need to do our research on
Yeah,
that.
well, we just watch them and talk about them. So that's interesting. And that's not surprising to me. Katie, do you have an opinion on this? Do you have someone that
I am
it's
not,
okay if not.
I'm not someone who could do group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I have been to a group once before, and it's just not for me. I'm not someone who can share in front of a group of people. So this is not something that I would have been capable of. I don't want to say that it's not something I would choose. It's just I'm not capable of having that kind of emotional breakthrough in front of a group of strangers. So it's not anything that I would have chosen or any of those people that I could possibly imagine having. And like you said, watching the masculinity, watching them having these huge feelings,
The
physically.
physicality of it was so.
I would need to be in a
Intense.
small room with one person
On a
that
couch
I trusted,
with a box of tissues and a cupcake.
with like very a close connection with before I felt anywhere safe enough to talk about it.
Right.
So there's no way any part of that would have worked for me.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like how many of those guys go in there thinking the exact same thing, like this isn't going to work. And I think some of the guys even spoke to that. Like, I don't really expect to break down and all that. But when, again, speaking from a man who's, willing to tap, or not willing to, but who might need that type of energy in front of him in order to break down, in order to get through those things, then, even if I don't want to shed that armor, that might be the only way to do it.
Right.
And it sounds like what we're discovering, maybe we're not any breakthroughs here, but that the more feminine energy people don't need that same type of like aggression, I guess. If I were to choose somebody, I probably would have chosen Vegas just because of his intensity. Now,
well, I can see some similarities drawn between you and Vegas too, in those ways where like you're very like from the outside. Obviously, our documentary listeners don't know this, but
I have intense eyes.
Jeff looks very scary from the outside. Like you look like you could be part
when
of a
I met
biker gang.
You were wearing a mask.
Oh yeah.
And I told Molly this, like when you took your mask off, your face didn't match. It just didn't go together, and it took me a really long time to put it together.
There's something about someone being fully tatted from the neck down, long hair, like that vibe, all black. Like it looks like someone that your mom tells you that you need to not talk to.
You do ride a motorcycle,
right?
I
like
do.
you
and
look
I crash
tough.
it, and then I break
100%.
my face, and
But you are a softie.
Yeah.
But you are a softie deep down, so that way that Vegas kind of gets that way, and like he's an inmate. Like he looks like you're supposed to be scared of people in prison, but the way that he can like connect and draw people out, like I see a lot of similarities with you and him. So
I take that as a compliment because I had
100% is.
I had a lot of respect for him.
Yep.
And regardless of his own situation,
100%.
He was willing to help people go through this. So Vegas, if you're listening to this, kudos, man.
Wouldn't that be cool?
We love you.
Reach out to us, please.
Cool.
We'll be your pen pal.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be cool.
I would love that.
All right, let's get into some standout moments. I think there's going to be a lot, so we'll kind of maybe try to go through some of them somewhat quickly. I'm going to start, if you guys don't mind. I really appreciated in this world, the world of this therapy session, when, of course, first of all, they said we leave our street views, our gang affiliations, all this stuff
Sorry.
at the door, and we're all coming in here. We don't care about that. We're all the same. We're going to be vulnerable together. And when we go back out into the yard, we're not calling, we're forgetting all that. So that was great. But what I think was nice is there was a lot of different spiritualities represented there. There was a Native American spirituality represented with the sage and the feathers and the drums and the singing. There was African, which I do believe that's where the Zimbabwe chants come from. There was Christian because some of them said amen at the end of things. Muslim, they didn't touch on this a whole lot, but I did see some traditional, I believe they're called taqiyas, which is the head kind of cap and garb that was represented. So I liked that there was a lot of different, and nobody seemed to focus on that. It was like, we're here, we're here to be vulnerable together, and everybody's religion is accepted here, whatever that may be. Yeah, so that's what I had. Katie, what stood out to you, my friend?
I think I wrote down some of my favorite lines, and I think it was one of the guys in prison said, "This TA could be a murderer." Was that Chris? Is that his name, or is it Brian? I've got it right here. Brian. Brian is the TA. He's the one that had the big group of people on him when he was trying to break out. He just had this calm demeanor that was like, yeah, sometimes I feel like I could just shoot people. Like, he just said that so offhand. And he just had this vibe that I was texting Molly. I was like, he is the epitome of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And he dealt with it. But also, I think one of them said, I pity all the women in your life.
Oh, wow.
Because
I don't remember that, but yeah.
Because of how he behaves. And I just looked at it and I was like, I know so many people, or I have met so many men like this in my life. And to think that he came here for therapy.
Yeah, you came here for a reason, dude.
Right.
So you either came here thinking I'm going to watch other people go through it, or you came here and thought maybe I might learn something.
Right.
And that's something to be admired. That means
Good
you're
on him.
open to
Right.
change. But, you know, a narcissist can go to therapy and think that they're fine. So
Yeah. I was curious about Brian the whole time, and we spoke about that a little. He seemed really tied up with that machismo, that toxic piece that you were speaking of. So he seemed really tied up, like I said, in not releasing that machismo, and he rubbed these inmates wrong almost immediately. I mean, and from what I've heard, I've never been incarcerated, but from what I've heard or what I've watched or anything like that, you know, these guys, they see a lot.
they do.
And it's not too hard to see through someone's bullshit fairly quickly. And if there's going to be a group of people that aren't going to be timid about calling you on your bullshit, it's going to probably be them.
Right. Yeah, they're seeing the worst of people every day. They're not hosting dinner parties and like making small talk about the weather. Like
they sat in a circle and talked about what they were in for.
Right.
Kidnapping and robbery and
and
murder.
The funny thing, and the thing I kind of did like, was it only took one inmate calling Brian out for him to break down. As soon as he got called, he broke out. He broke down.
And he talked about his dad.
His scream. His scream.
I think he needed it. He just needed the one pushover. I think his defenses came up way higher than they were as soon as he got in, saw men being vulnerable and emotional, and he was like, ha ha, like, I'm better than you because I'm not letting it out yet. And then when someone called him on it, he was like, oh, here are the floodgates. They're open.
And he realized maybe that, and he mentioned, like, I just don't like feeling disrespected. I want to kill people when that happens.
Yes,
and
that was terrifying.
I did not
motherfucker,
like that
and
made me really uncomfortable.
That's how people become school shooters.
That's how,
but the way I took that was everyone in there sitting back, almost relaxed, going, "Dude, welcome to the fucking club."
Right.
No, to me that sounds like the guy who is a what do they call them? Incels. Like, girls don't want to date me because I'm a nice guy.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go shoot him. Like, that's what that sounds like to me.
Yeah.
Which is different than someone who got in a gang and murdered someone from a different gang. That's totally different.
Molly, what stood out to you? What were some of what's first on your list, girl?
Girl. What stood out to me? You kind of mentioned earlier, one of the big ones was what was biker gang guy's name?
Rick.
One of the things that stood out to me was Rick saying that he was tired of people giving up over and over and over. And then saying, why can't we be enough to hang on to?
Yep.
And this was after my other moment. The end of it really killed me. Like, it shook me. When Dante was talking about his son and Vegas and him were having that confrontation, and Vegas was saying, do you hear me? do you hear me? With no response. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? And then he said, do you feel me? And he said, I feel you, and lost it.
Yeah.
And they hugged, and it was a moment. Their heartbeats were heard through the microphone.
I just got goosebumps when you said that because I have that written down. That was so moving.
It was just like,
yep. It slowed down.
Oh God, yes. It slowed down as they were hugging.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I found myself counting them, and I was like, the fact that that part was picked up, like they're pressed together, like that was the emotion of the moment through their heartbeats.
In an unintentional move by, you know, these guys have microphones on so that the recording crew, the video crew, the whatever, could capture the sound. Obviously they get muffled when they're pushed together, and the only you can hear their muffled voice, but that thumping of the heartbeat that was going so fast, and then as soon as he connected with them, like you said, do you feel me? It went dum 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 dum, slowed down, like he connected with them. I was like, oh my God.
It was like almost like that they had fell in sync with each other as soon as Vegas opened from do you hear me? Like, are you listening to me? Do what I say. And went to, do you feel me? I'm here with you. And Dante and him had that, like, it was like a metaphysical connection through their heartbeats.
Wow.
Of their emotions.
Did you catch that, Katie?
No, I must have pulled myself out because it was getting, because you're talking about the guy who was talking about unaliving himself.
Yes.
Yeah, I was too far gone. I was sobbing, and my dog was licking my face. My poor sweet baby was trying to take care of me. So
I thought Dante's story and his emotions, the way that he went through those emotions, was very, very moving. And the heartbeats, I was like, oh, it crushed me, and I loved it. Like it was inspirational, but I literally had to like take a step. I was like, I need to take a deep breath. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, and the
I
willingness.
Watched Encanto.
Yeah, you need to watch a palate cleanser after this one.
Right.
The willingness of Vegas in that moment after, and we won't stick around on this one for too long, but the willingness after Dante's confession of considering ending his own life.
Right.
Vegas's willingness to say, I need this much time.
He said, give me 90 days.
Give me time to come up with something, and then you do what you need to do.
We will work on it together.
Yeah, the willingness and the trust you have to.
Yes.
Talk about pressure on a third party or second part, whatever you want to say, on Vegas's part to help him through that.
Right.
But to be willing to say, I will do what it takes. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
So we're going to work on this. God, that's heavy.
And his emotional intellect to be able to say, if I can get Dante to agree to this goal, this physical number, this set time period.
Then we have something to look forward to.
We know that we have something to look forward to. I have that guaranteed time.
Right.
Also gives Dante that time to reflect on the decisions that he's going to make. And most likely after that 90 days, we'll get another 30, we'll get another 60 or whatever.
Or a lifetime, hopefully.
And hopefully it turns into a lifetime.
Right.
But the fact that he knew and could see that Dante needed that to set that goal is beyond amazing. Like that's years of therapy and like training. Like,
where did this guy get his training?
Vegas, you need to open up your own like clinic. Like what? I'm trying to go to your DBT therapy. Like what do you mean?
Dialectal behavioral therapy.
Oh yeah, I said that,
DBT,
and then I said therapy.
Yep.
You know, whatever.
Well, no, I just wanted people to
DBT.
know if they wanted to have access to it. DBT stands for dialectal behavioral therapy.
Google DBT,
also, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, two very popular forms and very effective forms. We do.
So for
we
me,
stand therapy.
Yeah. For me, I think one of the big things that stood out to me and hit me in kind of a deep way was the ties to fatherhood that were brought up over and over and over again, and the almost every one of those people in that circle had some kind of a not great relationship or story or something that directly related to their father or lack thereof, and or themselves being a father or whatever that may be. Again, a lot of the betrayals started or ended with the father.
It was a category. They talked about how have you been betrayed, and then they went around the circle.
Almost all of them.
And I never considered betrayal as some kind of trauma, but the way they described it as being left by parents, or like Charles said something, Chris said something about like his dad never called him my son.
Right.
What a betrayal that was. It was just such a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because betrayal doesn't necessarily have to mean I made you a promise and now I broke it.
Right.
But parenthood is a promise to take care of someone and to be there for someone. And
you
so
are
then
guaranteeing that I will care for you until you are 18.
And then not delivering that, especially when someone gets of age where they can understand what the promises that parenthood brings.
And being able to kind of almost translate as a father, what are those things that my kid, and how could they be perceiving those things? I mean, that was something like, did Chris's father really understand that him saying, go inside with your mother instead of helping me in the garage
was damaging?
Was damaging him by him saying, I don't want you out here because you're not good enough. You brought me the wrong tools. Like, he probably didn't.
Right.
And is that an excuse? Not necessarily, but it so as a father, and as most of the men that I am close to are fathers, it just really it hits you in a new way where you go, all these hardened criminals, these guys who have done years of things for some unspeakable acts that they didn't go into on all of them. Most of them had a tie back to a poor relationship with their father. And I'm not saying that's the exact cause. Like if this happens, then this happens.
Psychology is the base for.
It's one of the check boxes.
But someone who's supposed to be a hardened, rough exterior criminal with who's a bad person deemed by society, then is basically saying that they have daddy issues is a really hard concept to grasp, because they're still hurt individuals. They're still people.
They have feelings.
And they grew up.
We
were
can't
children.
write off people in prison as these terrible people anymore. We have to recognize that they're humans, they're hurt, and they hurt others.
Yeah, and specifically on this topic, a lot of it, the shining example of their betrayal or whatever it did have to do with their father. So as a new-ish father myself, that stood out to me fairly significantly. What else? Katie, you got anything else floating around that you need to get off your chest about this one?
Let's make sure that I'm accurate, because I just hate it when I'm not.
I liked when they were having quiet or moments where they were kind of talking calmly, and you could hear the other group screaming. And I was like, wow, I can't imagine
I want another
being
camera
in that environment too, where the group next to you is screaming and they're having their hard conversations at the time that you guys are kind of doing round robin, tell your trauma stories, and then vice versa, the physicality of being in the same room as another group and just having your little assignments and stuff. Oh my God. I was like, oh, I wouldn't be able to focus. I'd be like, oh my God, are they okay?
It didn't seem like most of them skipped a beat when it happened either.
They didn't even look. There was one guy I saw that looked over to see what was going on, and I would have been watching the whole time, been like, oh, what? Oh, do you need help?
When Brian was getting upset, he was lowering his head and crying. And I think it was Dark Cloud that said, cry with your chin up, like a man, cry proud.
Yes.
That quote I wrote down word for word because that meant something. And I know that
hit.
Women are expected to cry because they're sensitive, but men are not allowed to.
That
and so
was
to say,
huge.
cry
Cry like
with
a
your
man?
chin up like a man and proud. It was just, it reverberated through me. And I thought, can I show this to every man I know?
No, seriously. I
so
recommend it to
important.
everybody now.
Yeah.
My therapist is going to watch it. I told her about it today, about the podcast, and I told her about the show. She wrote it down. She wrote down which service she could watch it on. She's pumped.
Yeah. That was a very powerful moment that I agree with you that many, many, many boys never hear.
Yeah.
They never hear. Now,
so
some do, sure, but to hear that, even if it's kind of acceptable to feel those emotions, there's always felt like an undercurrent of, but that's something you do when you're maybe by yourself or in private. It's not
Cry with your chin up.
Cry
in a
with your
group
chin
of
up.
People.
Be a man and cry.
With a group
Those are
of
things-
other men
Right.
too, of all
Yeah.
places and all company.
Right. Yeah, so that I agree. That was a really cool piece. And he said it so off the cuff, like, hey, this is what we do here.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
And
this is,
and it was someone from prison.
yeah, it was an
And,
inmate.
and,
Yeah.
and in every prison TV show, every prison movie I've ever seen, like probably we've all seen, people get the shit beat out of them. They get shivved. I can't imagine a man standing in prison with his chin up, openly crying and not having the shit beat out of him.
Right.
And not to discredit Dark Cloud by any means, but that
If
is
that was him,
not
yeah.
the person that I was expecting it to come from.
Mm-hmm.
Like the impact that statement had because of how much generational worth
trauma,
and
yeah.
like
Yeah.
systemic like issues
Racism.
that we have in masculinity.
Yep.
His statement was so impactful
Yes.
by saying cry like a man, basically.
Right.
Yes.
Those are not
The patriarchy
phrases
has
that should be
not
together.
in any way been pulled down.
right.
And
He has such a rough exterior.
Yes.
I think he had
he's a large man.
I think he had the crime that was the most severe out of the ones that we were able to hear.
Right.
He was talking about gang violence, about like parental like issues, and he said cry like a man, and I just like it took me back, and it kind of made me do some self-reflection of how I view people in the system, because even though like all of us here are, you know, we don't have a lot of the biases and we try to be as open and non-judgmental as possible, like it's still ingrained in us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when he said that and I was taken aback, I was like, well, why am I taken aback by that? Like
Right.
That should be the
can
norm.
come from anybody.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, like society has taught me the first reaction, but I taught myself the second reaction of
Right.
being like, why would I doubt that a man that looks like that or sounds like that can have this like emotional impact?
This complex emotion.
This complex,
that also,
yes.
That also impacts the way that I'm thinking
Exactly.
of the display of emotion.
Yes.
Yeah. But still very much being a piece of that kind of hardened world. Because when Dark Cloud was having his own breakthrough and his breakdown, and unfortunately I don't remember exactly what his reason for that was, but Brian said something to him about him being gentle.
Oh, it was because
And
he felt like he betrayed his mom by
That's right.
by
That's
going
right.
to
With
visit his dad
Yep, I
and his
mentioned that
mom
earlier.
saying he's a scumbag.
Yeah.
And when he was proven right, or
Yeah.
when she was proven right about that, he was like, I
He
betrayed my
betrayed-
mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And Brian at some point thought it was a good idea to tell him he was gentle. And he said he was trying to kind of get him relaxed.
Ease him.
But
Yeah.
it didn't
reaction
hit
was
Dark
opposite.
Cloud that way. He was ready to murder.
Flattened to the ground.
Brian was
Yeah.
problematic.
He was. He was problematic. So that was, just another layer to that whole cake, I guess.
And he had to walk away. Like they had to.
Yeah, they had to pull him away.
Brian had to be
It's
in a
time to be
separate
done
room
for a
for a
little
minute.
while.
And
They
he's
were like, hang
we're
out
not
here.
going to let anybody go after you. Like, you're
Right.
going to be okay. And I was like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Also,
Like,
when Dark Cloud, when they went
don't
back
trust
over to
him.
Dark Cloud, and they were like, "He's not here anymore. He's not here." Like they had to reassure him that Brian was no longer around because Dark Cloud wanted to hurt him,
Yeah.
and was like, "Get the
send
go away from
Brian
me."
home.
Yeah.
Right.
He's not here for the right reasons. We thought he was, but
Brian has some more work to do, but
Yeah.
I hope he gets better.
I think he needs a personal therapist, and because he's just hurting other people.
Right.
Therapy is about healing yourself, not hurting others.
Right. So,
Screw you, Brian.
Katie,
geez, Katie.
jeez, Katie.
I'm just going to be judgmental. It's fine.
So is he. It's okay.
That's what he got called out for. Anyway.
We call Katie out.
some-
This is an intervention.
Yep.
So in this therapy session, they, for the most part, for the majority of it, it was open. It was, they were in a circle. They were all with each other. A couple little breakout sessions, but mostly it was whatever. But they had one spot where they made blanket forts. They made they created a space for the one person to be inside, to feel safe, and they were protected by their friends. They knew no one was going to come in there because their buddies who they've grown close to over the last couple of days were going to be protecting them. And they did a little, almost a little meditation session with that, where they turned the lights down. They said something like this: "You're floating above your body and finding your child self. What is the deepest need? What would have kept you safe? This ultimately led to Chris finally opening up and feeling his emotions. Throughout the whole first 3 and some part days, Chris, who was kind of the longer-haired guy, he finally opened up, and you could hear him sobbing in his little blanket fort. And that's when he starts talking about his dad not letting him work with him in the garage and how it made him feel like not enough. I thought this was really cool because, and this is honestly the one that eventually started the tears flowing in my face, because the fact that these guys didn't belittle his thing, like it was emotional neglect. It wasn't maybe, like
as physically violent as others.
Right.
And he started that. He said, this isn't as traumatic as yours.
This is going to sound like small shit, but none of them even batted an eye. It was, we're not here to compare our shit. We're here to work through your shit and each other's shit. So they set up this thing where one of the guys kind of played the role of Chris's dad.
That was one of the McLearys as well.
Yeah.
I like that guy as well.
Oh, that's
I think that was Simbawe guy.
Yes, the one with the white beard and hair. He was one of the McLearys.
Yep, and he played the father role. They set up this thing where they had to physically hold each other's arms, where they and Chris had to push through, and he struggled. He was like, he didn't want to get aggressive,
right?
And it wasn't until he got aggressive and physically fought with these men to get
verbally
through
confronted.
And verbally confront. Yes, very good. His quote unquote father in this moment. And he said, Chris finally looked at this father figure and he said, I'm good enough and it's not up to you.
Yep.
Wow.
That was when the tears rolled down my face. I was like, oh boy. I'm glad I was watching this with you guys, ladies, because I'm curious as to how well you all connect with that sort of thing. If this were an all-female prison, do you think that this would have been a similar situation? Would it have looked at all like what we saw if this was an all-female prison?
I don't think it would have had nearly the same impact on us. Societal context, physicality to it. I don't think there would have been nearly as much internalized, like they're like scared of crying. I think with an all women circle, it would have been basically a group therapy session. And if there needed to be like
shared experiences.
Yep. Or they would have gone like, you can share with the class now, and then they would tell their story and they'd move on.
I don't think there'd be a lot of bickering. I don't think there'd be any arguing.
I don't think there would be yelling. I don't think there would be crying for sure. Maybe we would have like on the count of 3, everybody scream at the same time, kind of get the emotions out.
Force some of that emotion.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think about women in prison, and I think about women who kill their husbands because of domestic violence. So I think there would be a lot of shared experiences when it comes to domestic and sexual violence. That's what I think about when I think of women's prison.
Right.
There's also drugs, but also people use drugs as a way to,
cope with things.
Yeah. So I think it would be a completely different experience. I think it'd be, like you said, much more subdued.
I also don't think that it would have had the profound impact and won awards and done those things and like really worked within the societal context because it would have just been watching a group therapy.
Right.
Like it would have been
very expected.
Just women talk. It would have been women trauma dumping, basically. There would be nothing breakthrough about women talking about their emotions.
Housewives bitching at a kitchen table. But trauma dumping instead of complaining about husbands.
There's nothing profound about women sharing their emotions because we do that.
And that's what I was going to say.
We do that.
And do you think that that's because of that you just said, because you do that, it's almost, I mean, if you're imagining like,
it's not shocking.
Like a balloon, right?
Right.
If you've got a balloon that every day or however often you're letting some of the air out.
Right.
It's not going to explode as loud when you finally let the air out.
They're certainly not holding back.
But if a man, for example, or a more masculine energy.
You're taking a needle and going.
Yeah, and it's going to explode.
Thanks. That was really good.
My pop noise? Oh, good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That hurt.
You flicked your cheek too hard.
I know. I thought I'd get it. Yours is better.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because I felt
I think
like
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I got very curious about what that might look like, and at the same time, as we get toward the end of the this is toward the end of the documentary, and they talk about, as you spoke earlier, about the recidivism and the lack
Recidivism.
the lack of returning to prison after this.
Oh, I wrote it down.
Is there a program that in the women's prisons, and I'm not expecting you to have an answer to this, but is there something as effective? Is the rate of recidivism the same for men as it is for women? Those aren't facts that I have, and those aren't ones that we're not here.
We don't have the answers, but we're asking questions.
We're not investigative journalists here. We're just talking about a documentary we saw.
Women are actually way less likely to go back to prison.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
After getting out, doing their time, especially when contributing to educational and therapeutic programs. And that also goes for,
You're so smart.
I studied criminology in college.
Right.
And communication. So like all of those things are kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And with specifically when women are assigned jobs in prison, that also helps them with not coming back.
Focus.
Yes. And they have something to.
Purpose.
Yes, it's the purpose portion of it, I think, that really does it for women specifically. And you can even see that on the TV shows and whatever, where people are like, I don't know, we were talking about this before, but 90 Days In, like when the civilians go into the prisons, they're like, I don't know what to do with myself.
Right.
And they're given a job and they're like, this isn't that bad. Like I have something to do.
I wake up every day and I have a job.
I have a purpose. I have a job, because I think for women, like we have to have something to do and to contribute to our household, to our families, and that kind of thing. Like growing up, like you're helping your mom with the dishes or
You're
cooking, and
coached in that.
your brother's playing outside.
From the patriarchy.
And I wonder, and I wonder too if like in the quote unquote the yard or in the cell block of a women's prison, if maybe the day to day, I'm not talking about the in the coffee shop with the civilian world where it may be everything's relaxed,
right?
Just in the yard in a prison, and this is coming from, of course, someone who's A, not a woman, and B, has never been incarcerated. So I'm talking very inexperienced here, but perhaps even in that world, it's more acceptable for a woman to share their emotions, expel those emotions, deal with those emotions, and move on than it is in the men's world, where they only get, how often did they say this? A couple
twice a year.
Yeah, twice a year
they do it.
Yep.
They do it twice a year
For 4 days.
I thought it was twice a year that the civilians were allowed to come.
You're right. Twice a year
yeah,
it's open to the public.
I also, with women specifically talking about their issues in a prison situation, a lot of women's issues stem from
They meet weekly.
men, truthfully. So being in an environment where there's only women around you already opens up the conversation, even though you're in a prison environment.
Yeah.
And
Unless the guards are men.
and those kind of things, like of being in a prison environment, kind of like it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. You're around people that you don't know. It's a very different situation, especially if it's the first time you've been there, and that kind of thing. But the fact that there is no looming threat of men.
You're not scanning the room constantly.
Right. And like there are other threats there by far.
Sure.
Obviously,
Sure.
like not
Dangerous
all
people,
women are
yeah.
super kind and nice and not going to beat you up.
Yeah.
Like it is what it is. But
Yeah.
the
It's not a
fact that
penis.
every woman goes through, or every even female presenting person goes
Right.
through genuine fear every time they see a man that they do not know in almost any context,
99%
unless they're
of
being like
settings.
introduced to
Sure.
that person
With someone.
So I would say that being able to talk, to my best knowledge, as someone who also has not been incarcerated,
Yeah.
in an all female situation, I've only had therapists that are all female. I've only been to group therapies that are all female.
Right.
I do not talk with a majority of my male friends about emotions or trauma or anything.
I'd love to speak to that.
Yeah. And
Well,
like
just so
I have,
you know, this is a safe place for that if you'd like to.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
No pressure.
Jeff has seen me cry multiple times.
I have. Yep.
But yeah, so like to be in that environment, even just to have all women around you, like if you make one friend or talk to one person when you're in the system, you're going to feel more comfortable sharing that information. And then men being with men, it's always a dick measuring contest. It's who's the top dog of this cell.
There's definitely the alpha, kind of mentality.
Absolutely.
And you have to, make sure that you are aware. There's similarly, to
you're sizing people up.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this with some reservation because I don't know how it's gonna come out when I say it, but similarly, maybe to the way a woman might feel walking into a room full of men, minus maybe not even minus the sexual part of it, walking into a prison full of men could feel very similar to that, coming in and going, everyone's a threat.
Yep.
To every piece of me.
Absolutely.
So you're always on
guard.
The guard. Not to say that women going into prison aren't on guard, because I'm sure they are.
We're just speaking in terms of men.
Right.
Even statistically, the violence in men's prison is way
astronomically
higher.
Right.
And
it's an expectation we have, and so they fulfill it.
Yeah, and it's an expectation that there's going to be big dogs and the men are yelling and those kind of things, and they need to show that brute strength in order to be seen as a valid person. And I think that's another thing about this documentary specifically, that's like none of these guys are one-upping each other, Brian excluded.
In this room.
Yeah, right.
Because they did speak about what happens out there is not what happens in here.
100%.
And
as soon as they probably walk out that room, they probably have to put their best faces on again.
Well, it's almost, it feels almost like
to survive.
It feels almost like you go back to like the, and I mean no offense by any of this, but back to almost like Neanderthal.
I was just about to say Neolithic, and I didn't know if that was the right word.
Because you're like, I might be the most progressive, forward-thinking,
But you still have to survive.
But survival is key.
Right.
So at some point when you're put into a situation, you have to adapt.
Yep.
And if that means I have to fight, well, then maybe that means I have to fight. If that means I have to
join a gang, then you have to join a gang.
Yeah, if that dick measure, as Molly so eloquently put it.
Yeah, sorry. If we're talking about cavemen and the Neanderthals, they have a bigger rock than each other, and they're bigger fire.
Two bigger rocks in a club.
Yeah, right. My hammer is bigger than your hammer.
Okay, so at the very end, there is a text, and that speaks to the recidivism that you talked about. And you have it, I have it, but why don't you go ahead and read it if you've got it.
In 17 years they've been doing this program, 40 convicts have been released, and 0 have returned. That's a 0% rate of recidivism.
This works. That to me is astonishing. Like,
it's enough to know that they should be doing more.
Where is this?
Yeah.
Is this not in other places? I mean, I don't know.
The thing I have with this is that just because a program works is not enough for people to use it somewhere else.
Right.
In Utah, they found that building little houses for the homeless was incredibly effective to ending the problem for homelessness, but they still didn't do it anywhere else. Like I said, Ann Richards was doing things like this in 1988 in Texas and had a very low rate of recidivism by putting in these programs. Doesn't mean that anybody else is going to look at this data and be like, let's do it.
Right. And I also want to say that this works because it's done this way. I mean, I haven't looked at the research to see, but it's not just therapy. It's therapy with people who are in the same situation, who understand, who have agreed to help each other see these things, people on the same playing field. I don't know that like you're not going to take the prisoner or the inmate and put them in a room full of civilians and have the same impact. It only makes sense because they know what they're going through, and
empathy.
it's prison ran. I mean, that it's run by the inmates.
They feel
Right.
heard.
Like we said.
Civilians couldn't come in and run it.
Right.
No, if they
they have
these-
control over it, and they have the most empathetic
right.
audience of all time.
If they brought in the civilians to do it and they were there to like run it, it would never have the same impact. So how did we feel after watching this? Molly, why don't you start? And I mean, we're running toward the end of our time here, but how'd you feel? Credits roll, and you said
I was like devastated,
Yeah.
in like the best and worst ways. Where I was like, "Oh my god, what did I just?" I had to like contemplate it for a while, and I watched it. So I took 2 days basically to watch this, a week apart. I watched the first half, and then I turned it off and looked at my roommate and was like, "We're not doing this right now. I cannot, no." And then we put on a Disney movie, and then I came back to it,
Yep.
and I watched the full thing, all the way through. Just alone and in a calm environment. I had like snacks and water, and I just needed to like breathe.
Yeah.
But afterwards, I just like kind of laid and like contemplated, and I felt like inspired, moved, and also horrifically devastated because the prison system and all of those thoughts and masculinity and all of those things
exist.
Yeah. And it just feels horrible to not be able to do anything about it.
Yep.
And the small things that us as individuals can do about it will never make a difference on the large scale of things.
That's how it feels. Yeah.
It's just a horrible
Yeah.
feeling to know that those people are going through that. And like we were talking about with prisons that don't have those systems in place, we'll never be able to see that.
Yeah. And I hope things like this spread,
100%.
And to speak to that too, to me, after watching, it was crazy to me to think about the people who are in there who quite possibly have a chance of never seeing outside of that prison. They are the ones that are putting in the work to get better. Right. That to me was kind of staggering and touching because it's almost backwards, as someone who's sitting on the outside going, when you think of quote unquote prison rehabilitation,
right,
you kind of think of somebody from the outside coming in as the savior to help these broken
it's people
on the
getting
inside.
their GEDs and like having talk therapy with someone.
Yeah, but it's the opposite.
Yeah.
These were prisoners helping the outside to break through.
Right.
In a way that nobody out here probably could have done. Katie, what were you feeling when credits roll?
I'm going to show you all this first.
Oh, that's cute.
Oh, that's cute.
So
it's a picture of her dog.
Yes, that was my picture of my dog Lola. So when I started crying when the guy was talking about unaliving himself, Lola came over and licked my face. I picked her up. We went for a walk. We watched Encanto, and then we finished the movie.
We don't talk about Bruno. Okay.
No, we don't talk about Bruno here. But Lola's the reason I got through it because she is my baby angel. Anyway, yes, I'm one of those people with a small dog that I'm obsessed with. But at the end of the show, it was, like you said, the inmates are the ones that are not only organizing this, but they're doing all of the work. And they're not going to get the payoff unless the parole board looks at them and says, you've made enough progress. Yes, you did a horrible crime, but look at how far you've come. And they get a chance to go back into the world. And it's almost luck of the draw, that you end up in the right prison with the right warden, with the right program.
Yeah, Vegas isn't getting out to get a mental health certification and become a therapist.
Right. And if
he should.
Yeah.
And you better hope it's a federal or a state prison and not a private prison, because then you're just screwed. It was devastating to see the realism, but I went into it knowing that prison is a terrible place. There's overcrowding. There's terrible atrocities that are happening, but it was nice to see all of these people coming together to make themselves better.
Yep, and that is where I landed was, I agree with all that. But
I'm listening.
But where I landed was, I am happy to see that there's something, after hearing stories like what DJ's brother, Andrew, has experienced in the prison system or the jail system, and knowing how rare it is for something to actually work. To know something is working, my hope is that there's just programs like this that I don't see that are working.
Right.
You know, I'm not out
Everywhere,
there researching
hopefully.
it. I think the overall message of this documentary is that vulnerability is healing. That the armor of toxic masculinity is a crutch and can be very damaging and keep you from being able to move forward.
But it also is a coping mechanism that's taught and
Absolutely.
learned for everyone.
I think another point is that help and breakthrough can come from very unexpected places.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I took away from it. I felt some hope because I am a believer that in rehabilitation that you know that people can
change.
I have a hard time just saying that a blanket statement that people can change because but I do believe that people can work toward that and
grow.
Yeah, they can grow. Coming away from it, it was a well-made documentary. I think it was a simply made documentary. I mean, simple in the fact that it was, you know, not a lot of camera tricks. There wasn't a lot of video editing and stuff like that.
And I'm glad they did it.
Same.
It was well done in that way.
They just focused on the people.
Yep. I would have loved to maybe talk to Chris and Brian and we didn't really talk much about.
I need to where are they now?
Yeah.
Exit interview.
What are they doing now? Are any of those inmates still in and doing this? You know, what's going on with all that? But
yeah, did Brian kill anyone yet?
I was gonna say, can we find out was Brian later
incarcerated?
arrested? Yeah, for murder.
Yeah,
he did the opposite.
Brian's ex-girlfriend turned him in.
Right. Yep. All right. So we have come to, unless anyone has anything they want to add. Everyone good? Everyone happy? Everyone okay?
Happy's a strong word after talking about this.
Yeah.
Hopeful.
Let's rate this with an official documentary rating. Just like every week, each crew member has scored this documentary on a scale of 1 to 10 items, with 1 being as disrespectful as being called gentle in prison, and 10 being as good as a nice, deep, cleansing cry. The item that we used for scoring this week was blanket forts, because that was a pretty fun part of the documentary. Let's start with Katie. How many blanket forts for The Work?
9.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9
in
blanket
sign
forts.
Language.
9 sign language
blanket forts.
Molly, how many?
8 blanket forts.
8 blanket forts. I did give this a 9 blanket forts as well. I thought if it can move me to tears, then it deserves to have a pretty good rating. In my opinion, this means that this documentary is tied for the top rated documentary that we've done in our show so far at 8.6666666666666 repeating, just like Stutz, which is funny. We must have some psychological brains because these are 2 documentaries that are about psychology and the inner workings of the brain and how we can better ourselves and things like that. So it does not surprise me that these are our favorites. All right. So Sellies, inmates, sisters, brothers,
inmates,
friends, thank you for coming and hanging out with us this week and diving into yet another documentary. I hope you all know that I'd be happy to hold my head up and cry with you about any of our deepest betrayals and vulnerabilities. All you got to do is open up and keep your head held high like a man. Now, let's talk about next week's episode. For next week, the crew will be taking a little trip to the land of Indonesia. But this is no vacation.
Yeah, this one's going to make me sad.
We will be discussing the long but poignant documentary, The Act of Killing. This focuses on the perpetrators of the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 and 66 in present day. This is a 122-minute or 159-minute if you want to watch the director's cut documentary from 2012, so it's super long, so buckle up. It can be streamed on Amazon Prime Video, Tubi, or Hulu. Anyone seen The Act of Killing?
I watched a preview.
Watched a preview?
No, it's as close as I got.
Yeah. Molly?
I have not.
No, me neither. Not yet. From what little I've read about it, I expect this one, it may take a few sittings to watch, not just because it's long. I think it's going to be intense and scary and, but
Political.
Yep. So everyone, please go out and check out the documentary, The Act of Killing, before next week's episode. Again, Amazon Prime, Tubi, Hulu. Join us next week. We'll take a look at some seriously horrible actions, one documentary at a time. Go out and rate and review our podcast on your favorite podcast streaming services. Let us know what you think of our show. If you want to connect with us, look for @Talkumentary Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or shoot us an email at info.talkumentary@gmail.com. On behalf of DJ over there in the booth, Katy, Molly,
Hey.
James asleep on the couch.
Oh, is he still here?
He's still here. You didn't even
no
see him back
idea
there.
he was here.
But would fall asleep and
I
start
thought he
kicking.
left after we shoot. After we
And on behalf of the
Zimbabwe.
entire Talkumentary family, I am your host, Jeff Kolaski, and I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you keep your minds open and be kind to each other. Zimbabwe. Shoo! Zimbabwe. Shoo!